Welcome to another episode of Stories from Science, and I'm so happy that I do have my regular guest with me. Hello.
Hi, I'm back again.
Good to have you back on the set, Shay.
Glad to be back. So it's fun to have these conversations.
Oh yeah, as we explore stories from science. So where is the journey going to take us today? So this episode is called Tormented Genius. And of course it's about scientists. What does that bring to mind when we say tormented genius?
Sometimes scientists and discoveries don't necessarily go with the norm of the times itself, or there's conflict among scientists themselves.
No, that's interesting because one of the things for our audience out there is that Shay actually doesn't know really much of what we're going to talk about, and he's really just heard the topic. So it is possible that tormented genius could have to do with the battles. But you know what we're going to look at today, Shay? You know, have you heard the term mad scientist?
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh no. All right. So one of the things that we're going to explore in this episode in Stories from Science and of Scientists is that does creativity come with a heavy price? What do you think?
Yes, I do think so. Our history has shown a lot of scientists who made very big discoveries were diagnosed with some type of mental illness in the past.
All right, now that's quite interesting. And the question is the incidence of mental issues more prominent among scientists, not just scientists, you know, creative people, even writers, artists, anyone who sort of thinks out of the box and almost has a different perspective as they look into the world. So you're on the track now, and those of you that may be joining us even at this stage of our series, just want to remind you how we do the episodes. So Shay has 2 signs in front of him. Will you share them with us? Is it true?
And we have false.
All right. So I'm going to make a statement, and Shay's got to decide is it true or false. And that's going to cue us and trigger us into a particular story, which is today going to deal with the topic of tormented geniuses. All right, so the topic really what we're going to explore is it greater incidence of what we call mental illnesses among scientists than the general population. And I will start by taking you back like maybe 2,000 years ago by a very famous quote by none other than Aristotle, right? He's like the scholar from 2,000 years ago. And he says, no great mind ever existed without a touch of madness.
I guess.
So, you know, it kind of raises the issue that as far back as thousands of years ago, from just general observation, people started to think that those that are creative can solve amazing problems, that it comes at a price, right? And so the term, the mad scientist. So is there truly today in this era, is there a biological link between creativity and mental disorders? Well, this is a question heavily being studied. And it turns out some of the early studies really, even at this stage, and they've done it among like hundreds of thousands of people, even up to 1 million in their sample set, where they look at creativity and incidences of mental illness. What do you think they've been finding? Because what they're looking for is that, is there a genetic marker? Is it that in a family where you find a lot of creativity, there's also higher incidence?
Well, that's an interesting topic in itself, because a lot of mental illness could be both developmental and biological as well.
Right, yeah.
So that's not necessarily an easy measurement to make.
Absolutely. So it's a very, very difficult issue to wrangle. Childhood experiences, the environment in which you grew up, all of these can affect your mental health and well-being. So it's turning out, though, there appears to be a sort of a genetic link. And what you sometimes find, and this is from some of the studies that have been done, that if you have someone, let's say, who is a high-performing artist or scientist, that though that person may not have any issues of mental illness, they don't look very far to find examples of it in the family. So, just making an easy example, Albert Einstein, right, one of the greatest known scientists, his son actually suffered from schizophrenia. Okay, so that's a kind of link they're starting to find. These are all very early studies. Okay, so today we're going to look at some specific cases. And what do we mean? So some of the cases we will look at when we deal with mental illness is schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is when people have hallucinations, sometimes auditory hallucinations. They hear voices, they have delusions and difficulty in being able to separate reality from imagination type of thing. We will also be looking at bipolar disorder, right? Now these are new terminologies. They didn't exist in Aristotle's time.
That's true.
They didn't exist a few hundred years ago. Okay, so all these designations, and we're going to look across the board. So bipolar disorder deals with, sometimes it's called, you have like manic depressive. People go into very high performing, very manic episodes, and that's followed with deep depression. And these things make functioning very difficult, right? And we're just going to be able to, and of course one way or another, if it's not our own selves, but we know of people who are plagued with some of these things, anxiety and depression and panic disorder. So the scientists who have changed the world and brought us to this amazing technological era that we are in, did they suffer from some of these things? Okay, so with that I get started with your first question that you have to figure out. First statement, if it's true or false.
I'm ready for you.
Are you ready?
Let's do this.
Let's do this. And you know about Nikola Tesla?
Yes.
Okay, right? So some of you might be familiar with the electric vehicle Tesla, which is named in honor of Nikola Tesla. So here's a statement regarding him. Tesla was born during a lightning storm. Is that true or false? And let me repeat it while you think about it, our audience, and while Shay thinks, is that a true or false statement? Tesla was born during a lightning storm.
Well, if I'm going to just guess, because I honestly have no idea.
That'll work.
I'm going to go the most statistical answer, which is false.
Okay, so he has 50% chance of being right or wrong if he's guessing, right? So was he right or was he wrong? Well, let's figure it out. Well, this one I will tell you the answer right up front. Normally, I wait towards the end of the story to figure it out. Well, it actually turns out to be true, right? So one wrong for Shay. Let's take a note of that. Now what's interesting about this is that Tesla, it's because of Tesla, all the electricity and a lot of the modern technology is based on stuff that he did. And it's interesting because he was born during a lightning storm, and his mother said, "This is a child of darkness." And the midwife said, "No, this is a child of light." So do you think he's a child of darkness or a child of light?
He certainly had some dark times.
Yeah, and that is what we will look at. And yet he brought light into our lives. So he's a bit of both. And it's very interesting because that, of course, is true. So if you're not familiar with Nikola Tesla, he is the person, he's an inventor, he's an electrical engineer, the light bulbs, even remote controls, all these high-tech things, somewhere he's had a role in it. He has had over like 700 patents, and that's just to tell you, right, all these technology. But he was obsessed with electricity. And so he left what is now known as Croatia, right, Serbia, those regions, with 4 cents in his pocket, and he came to the United States. And he came with a reference to Edison. Do we have a light bulb, right? When we think of light bulbs, we think of Thomas Edison. And his recommendation said from his former employer, "My dear Edison, I know 2 great men. You are one of them. The other is this young man." Right, and so Edison took him on in his lab, and that's when the you can say the current wars began between AC electricity and DC power, and that could be an entire episode. But what we are talking about today is some of the tormented genius. So was Tesla a tormented genius? You're at all familiar with anything with him?
I know that Mr. Edison took credit for the light bulb.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, like I said, that could be an entire episode with their wars between them. But it turns out that Tesla actually pretty much suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder in a very classic way, in the sense that he was very obsessed with the number 3.
Really?
He had to like circle around a building or walk through a block 3 times before he would enter it. He would swim laps in a pool in multiples of 3. And if he lost count, he had to start it over. He had his meals precisely at 8:10 p.m. And he had to have like 18 napkins, and he always stayed on the floors and in rooms that were divisible by the number
3.
3. There you go. All right, so that's actually a very textbook classic case of OCD, right? And that he was actually, it's quite clear that he dealt with. He had quite an obsession with pigeons, and he was very germophobic. So he had these little qualities about him. He had an aversion to pearls. I think one time his secretary, all right, I'm not around Tesla and I'm not wearing pearls. I think his secretary came to work with pearls and he sent her home.
Oh my.
So did this take away from his contributions?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit difficult to deal with, but his contributions were definitely important.
Yeah, so Tesla is one of the greatest geniuses that we know. Now, in his case, he was able to work with these nuances, right? As difficult as it might be for other people around him. But sadly, Tesla died alone, penniless, in New York, in a New York hotel room where he was found. He loved pigeons. I think there's a story that he
was in love with a pigeon.
Yes, he was in love with a pigeon. All right. So these are interesting stories about scientists that have clearly dealt with some mental conditions, but clearly in Tesla's case, we see that it didn't keep him back. All right, he chose a life of celibacy because he did not want to be distracted from his work. It is said that he always made sure that he was always photographed on his better side. He had a lot. He would curl his toes 100 times every night before going to sleep. So all of these are not what you would say are ordinary behaviors on the spectrum, right? And he would have been dealing with definitely obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, so he of course goes back from the early 1900s to 1943 when he passed away. So he probably never even went to a psychiatrist for diagnosis. So how can we say some of the things we're talking about in this program today? So today psychiatrists look at retrospectively at the records of scientists and come up with diagnosis. Not that they were actually diagnosed in their own time. Now the interesting thing with these folks, like when they are very obsessive compulsive disorder, is there are tremendous amount of notes that they have left behind.
Yes.
Yeah, so they've recorded everything about them. I mean, there are boxes of notes which are still classified from Tesla, right, which the US government has because of some of the projects that he was working on. He claimed to have had the death ray. I think we should do an entire episode on just Tesla, but we owe so much to him, and it's very sad that he did die penniless and alone at the end of all how much he has done to improve our lives. Okay, next.
I'm ready.
Okay, all right. So this time our scientist he has appeared in a previous episode. It's none other than Darwin.
Okay.
So when you say Darwin, we think of
evolution,
all right? And he has left such a mark in the world, in the field of biology, in terms of how they understand. And we're not just talking about human evolution, we're talking about the birds and the trees and animal life, all types of stuff. Okay? All right, so Shay, are you ready for the next one?
Yes, okay, I promise I'll get it this time.
All right, so the statement is, Darwin suffered from poor mental health for 5 years after his famous voyage. So I want you to think about it, and we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to hear what you think. Is that true or false?
Okay.
And folks, it's good to have you back, and I hope you've thought about the statement as Shay has been during the break. So it was, Darwin suffered from poor mental health for 5 years after his famous voyage. True or false?
True.
So Shay says it's true. All right. Technically, I kind of pulled a technical one on you this time. Yeah, technically it's false, because for decades after his famous voyage, he suffered from mental health, not just 5 years. Okay, so what were some of the challenges that Darwin suffered from? I mean, a name so famous as that, who produced 19 books, numerous papers, and thousands of letters, which scientists, historians of science still study, would you believe he suffered from panic disorder? He would be vomiting for days before having to go and speak in public for 5 minutes. He would be slipping into hysterical sobbing, sweating, tremors and palpitations, nausea, extensive vomiting, panic attacks, and historians have diagnosed him with almost like 40 different disorders. And in the end, he was pretty much confined to his home. So finally, the general thing they diagnose him with is panic disorder with agoraphobia. You know what's agoraphobia?
Is that the fear of going outside?
Yeah, inability to leave the home. And so you can see the tormented genius in these cases. And eventually he said, I am forced to live very quietly, and I'm able to see scarcely anybody and cannot even talk long with my nearest relations. And even with that, he had a life so full of contributions and lived to age 73. Now that's a lot of torment.
That's interesting. I wonder what caused that. You said after his
I did.
Yes. Did he study at, like, let's say, Galapagos by himself for a long time?
Yes, he went on the ship, and they say that it started to manifest itself around that time.
Was he secluded or something?
These are questions that psychiatrists are still trying to answer, because, and again, he had very, very detailed notes about his conditions, but it has a tendency to manifest itself at particular ages, and it's around then that he really suffered a lot. We're just going to do one thing on the map. I know once before we've really tried to find Galapagos Island. Do you want to give that a shot again? And hold it up for our audience. Galapagos Island.
If I had to guess, it's somewhere in here.
Aha! Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, you're kind of on track. All right, so I'm going to move to another statement, okay? And this one has to do with a mathematician, and there are a lot of studies that deal with mathematicians actually dealing with mental challenges. So, brilliant mathematician Gödel, I don't know if you've heard about him. Okay, so he's like one of the top mathematicians in all of times. So brilliant mathematician Gödel refused to travel to the White House for an award, fearful he might contract an illness. True or false?
That sounds true. It's more true nowadays than ever.
And we give you that one. We give you that one. And so, folks, that's actually true. So, Gödel was an absolutely brilliant mathematician. He discovered truth's logic, right? That's one of the things he dealt with in mathematics. And he's considered to be like one of the top 100 most influential thinkers in the 20th century. But at age 8, he read a book on a medical book, and he became really obsessed with that he had a weak heart.
I see.
And this developed or manifested itself as to a lifelong hypochondriac. He was convinced that people wanted to poison him. All right, and he became extremely paranoid. All right, and now when you deal with these conditions, how do you function? How do you create? How do you work? It reached a point where his wife had to taste his food before, because to make sure that he's not being poisoned. All right, and like I said, these are tormented geniuses, because what happened is that his wife, Adele, was actually hospitalized in 1977, and she could not taste his food. What do you think happened, Shay?
Well, sane individual saying we would hire another taste tester. However, I'm sure he went into some type of depression.
It's an interesting point you raise. Is something I've thought about, but I think he just did not trust anyone. He did not trust his medical doctors. He did not trust anyone for whatever they were saying about his conditions except Adele. And Adele could no longer taste his food. He died
From starvation?
from starvation, weighing 65 pounds. And this is a tall gentleman. And his death certificate actually says he died from malnutrition, inanition caused by personality disturbance. And it's painful to realize the contribution, the genius of these persons, and some of the personal challenges that they've had to live with. Right? He would be phoning up his friends, constantly complaining. He descended into self-loathing and paranoia, and his end is quite sad. All right, so a lot of our episodes have sad things around them, and yet these people have contributed so much to humanity. Okay, I'm going to go to a next case, much more recent, and mathematician again. So when you start to study these things, something about mathematics statistically, right? We are just going to say some of it could be what we say is confirmation bias. We think we're seeing these trends. So here's the statement. The diagnosis of schizophrenia led brilliant mathematician John Nash to permanently retire from academia. Is that true or false?
The
diagnosis of schizophrenia. So he's more recent, right? He was born in 1928, and so now he was able to get psychiatric evaluation and so on. And as a matter of fact, I suspect you may know of him. Have you seen a movie called The Brilliant Mind?
No, I haven't.
Okay, must see. If there's one movie I like to recommend to everyone, it is Beautiful. Did I say brilliant? Let me make a little correction there. Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, right? And it's about his life. So diagnosis of schizophrenia led brilliant mathematician John Nash to permanently retire from academia. True or false?
That sounds reasonable. I'll go through.
Okay, sounds very reasonable, especially if those of you that may have seen the movie, that living with schizophrenia, which is hallucinations, is not an easy condition. You can't distinguish reality from whatever is that you are perceiving. And it turns out to be false.
Really?
Yeah, so one more strike for Shay. Now, what do we mean by that it's false? Well, it turns out that he came with a letter of recommendation for his PhD, one line, or should I just say 5 words. This man is a genius.
Interesting.
I write letters of recommendation. I've never had the opportunity, met anyone that I could simply write that. This man is a genius, and of course, indeed, he was. And in his 30s, he got diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and it's very sad because he would be walking the halls muttering to himself like a homeless person. He'd be writing equations which were unintelligible, and those of you that may have seen the movie, he started to think that he was in some kind of a paranoid situation and a secret agent trying to solve these missions, and this is a true story. So the statement that I made, that did this cause him to retire permanently, in a way you could say it has a happy ending at this point, in that he returned to academia in his 50s, much being able to control the condition, because now he's in a much more recent time. So with medication, counseling, and support from family and loved ones, John Nash came back to work at the universities.
That's finally a happy ending.
Yeah, it's a happy ending, and I guess I just don't want to give you happy endings, because just in 2015 he was returning from receiving an award in mathematics with his wife, and they both died in a car accident.
Well, we all have our times to go.
Yeah, he did live to be 86 though.
That's a life well filled.
Yeah, it's a life well lived. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very short one, and it'll be it for the day, right? Newton tasted the elements in his study of alchemy, including mercury. True or false?
That's false. Wouldn't he have died?
Okay, right? We all know how dangerous mercury is for us, right? So would somebody brilliant like Newton go around tasting mercury? He was obsessed with alchemy, right? It's actually true. So Shay, yes, your record is a little low today, right? He did. So why do I mention Newton? So those of you who would like to read up more on his condition, because we are talking about tormented geniuses, geniuses who've had to deal with mental illnesses, and in his case, retrospectively, they believe he had bipolar disorder, right? So he had these bursts of activities where he did, we all know, right? Newton and so on. But then he did not trust anybody. He had no friends. He was very isolated. And again, we have his notebooks, and they're filled with anxiety, sadness, fear, a low opinion of himself. Sir Isaac Newton, and even suicidal thoughts. All right, so he had delusions and all of these things. So Shay, today's episode has been sad because it's about tormented geniuses, and yet what we've seen is that despite all these things that they've dealt with, they've been able to
overcome these challenges.
Overcome and perform.
Which is great.
And I think that's great. I think there's a sign of hope in that for all of us regular folks, families, friends that you may be aware of that are dealing with conditions, that perhaps with the right support and everything, we can be able to do something better. And on that sober note, we call it a day, right? And we look forward to seeing you for our next episode, and when we cover another story from science. So it's over and out from us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.